Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 9 of MC200. At this point, you guys have completed your print story as well as your peer review story. And so we are starting to develop the various kinds of writing that you might do as a media professional. This week and next week, we'll be working on online stories and specifically focusing on feature stories. And so that will be your next assignment, which I'll go over during this lecture. Please note that the grace period or late call period for assignments did end last week on the 16th. So all deadlines will need to be met from this point moving forward throughout the semester. And the rubric has built in that if you turn in something late, that your grade will be deducted. Although I still encourage you to turn in a story, even if it is late, because you only lose roughly 10 points per assignment, as opposed to having to take a full zero. So if you have any concerns about deadlines or timing, please feel free to reach out. I'm always willing to work with students to try to figure out different ways to accommodate things that come up. But for the most part, we need to be really working on how to manage deadlines since that is a key skill for media professionals. So, with that said, let's jump into chapter 12, which discusses how to write features. Now, features are human interest stories. They tend to fall into that soft news category because they are not time specific for the most part. Feature stories tend to be longer. They're more descriptive in nature. They're a little lighter in tone. They tend to be very sensory, meaning that you're describing with all of your five senses what is happening around you. They tend to be pretty detailed and can also be a little more creative than the regular inverted pyramid style usually allows for news. However, that does not take away the primary goals of journalism. Even features still need to be based on facts. You still need to remain objective, meaning that you're that third party, neutral, just kind of distanced observer as you're describing these things. You still need to be fair and balanced in your writing, and all of the information you share should be verifiable. Now, the key thing for new writers who are working on features to consider is that features need to be newsworthy. Everyone does have a story, but not everyone has a story that large audiences will want to read. So, features really have to drive home those news values that we talked about earlier in this semester in order to get people in the audience, whether that's someone watching or reading, to care about the person or organization that you're featuring. Often we use features kind of as spin-off or sidebars of hard news topics. So for instance, while you might share, the numbers of COVID cases that are rising, a feature could be someone who has been affected by COVID in a particular way. So you can see that while it's still a hard news topic, it's being approached in a little bit softer and less immediate way. Common topics for features tend to include politics, medicine, sports, business, technology, education, medical, and science. So these are great areas for you to look at as you consider what areas you might want to feature. Now, feature topics need to be based off universal needs. In talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can see that we really have five categories of needs as human beings. And the lower on the pyramid, the more important they are. And so, if you have a story topic that meets those lower levels of the pyramid, that's going to appeal more universally to all audiences. Just as I said, feature topics can be very newsworthy. They should be newsworthy, but they can approach hard information, important information. It's just presented in a different way. So, for instance, the physiological needs are the lowest part of Maslow's hierarchy because we all need air, water, food, shelter, clothing to survive. And so, a story like this about Flint's water crisis and how some of the citizens in Flint, Michigan were the ones who knew that something was wrong and reported it. This is more of a feature piece, although it deals with a very important topic. And that topic matters to people because obviously the safety of our water supply is something that needs to be considered because we all need water to survive. But sometimes features can be a little bit lighter, such as this article from AL.com, which profiles the owner of Eugene's Hot Chicken, Zebby Carney. Now, this is still an important topic. It still matters to many members of the community because Eugene's is kind of this hot new restaurant coming on the scene. It also talks about him being able to bring new business to different areas of the city where Eugene's is being relocated. And so feature stories tend to be a little lighter like this one, but that doesn't mean that they always have to be. Now, when you're trying to decide what you want to write for a feature story, you want to select interesting, newsworthy topics. And then once you pick a topic like medicine or business or something like that, you need to narrow it down into a central point of emphasis. You should only be featuring one person or one organization or one event. So it really boils down to you are profiling this one thing, and that's really important because if you try to fit too much into a feature, it becomes a little disjointed and hard to read. So it's also important for a journalist to consider how they are going to get the information for a feature. It's really good if you're doing a feature on an organization, an event, a person that you're able to visit and observe that person or organization or thing that's going on. Because as we said, features are more descriptive. So it's going to require that you as a journalist observe the world around you and then write to that. So as much as possible. And I understand we are under some different circumstances with COVID-19 and safety. As much as humanly possible, your feature should be something that you can go and observe. However, please know that your safety is of the utmost importance to me, and we can make it work if you cannot go and observe the thing that you're describing. Usually, features include a lot more sources than a hard news story. Your textbook mentions 6 plus interviews for a full length feature. For your assignment, you'll only be required to do two, but just know that it's not enough just to interview one person that you're featuring. You have to talk to people who know that person as well. That's part of what makes them newsworthy, is hearing from other sources about that featured person or organization. Now, a feature is set up very similarly to other news stories. You're going to have your lead. More often than not, you're going to be using an alternative lead as opposed to the summary lead that we use with inverted pyramid style. And the leads tend to be more descriptive and emotional because you're trying to get your readers to buy in to the person or organization that you're featuring. Within the body of the story, you need to find the right style. It very well could be inverted pyramid, but often we use things like narrative, hourglass, and others to describe feature stories. So pick the right style to use depending upon your subject area. Make sure you use transitions because a lot of times features tend to be longer. So we need to signpost and guide our readers along the way. And think of feature writing more like storytelling. You need to have a beginning where you have this person that has a problem or need that needs to be met. Then you bring the audience along into the climax of the drama, that pivotal moment when things change for that person that you're featuring. And then the end of your story is kind of a resolution of how that person is doing now and what they're hoping to do in the future. Although features tend to use a lot more sources, we still want to use quotes sparingly. Remember, you should only be using sources and quotes for opinions, emotions, and facts that need attribution back to experts or sources. When you end a feature story, try to avoid a summary tag. Instead, try to use like an anecdote that would present the resolution of the story. You could end on a quote, which is pretty common for features, or repeat like necessary keywords that the audience might be more familiar with as they read. Now, there are many types of features, and I'll run through these with a couple of examples. The most common type of feature is a profile. This is when you describe an interesting person, and you, as the journalist, are going and observing and talking to that person and interviewing people who know that person as well. The key to a profile is you can't pick out an average person. You have to find someone that is newsworthy, that readers will care about. So you have to find out what makes this person unique, what makes them important, that other people will care. So a lot of times we're going to use the news value of conflict when we're profiling someone because that person is either controversial or is helping to resolve a conflict in the broader society. So, for instance, this story is was created about one of Egypt's young professionals who is at the forefront of their Me Too movement, and it profiles her work. So it's a very interesting piece because she's someone who matters, who is trying to resolve conflict with her work, but is also very controversial within her country. Now, there are also historical features. These tend to commemorate historical events. They're usually driven by some kind of current event that's going to come up, a holiday, or anniversaries. Now, holiday reporting is actually a specific type of feature, but what I mean is that something happened in history on that holiday and we're looking back at how it was created or something. A historical feature focuses on an overview of what happened historically and why it matters today. So, for instance, I study school shootings in my research. So, I pay particular attention to historical features that mark the remembrance of those particular events, like we see here in the Parkland story featured. Adventure features are pretty fun, but they have to be very newsworthy and unusual to discuss. An adventure feature kind of focuses on a person or organization that's doing something extraordinary, and it has to rely on action. It has to be something that you can show people that it's something that's so cool and adventurous that other people would want to do it. Sometimes the journalist does accompany the person being featured on their adventure, but not always. For instance, I wrote this piece for UAB Medicine when I was working there about Calvin Kennedy, who climbed Mount Kilimanjaro um, in order to help with organ transplant awareness. And so the key here is that we had video of him. He took pictures that he allowed us to use. We were able to describe a lot of action. And it created a bit of drama. So, an adventure feature talks about something that's unusual and exciting, a person that has an extraordinary experience. Seasonal features are those holiday features that I discussed a little bit earlier. These are just stories that you would write anytime a holiday comes up. So, we have Thanksgiving approaching, or Halloween comes even before that. And so you could write particular stories about that holiday, but you have to connect them back with things that people care about. Obviously, right now, a lot of the Halloween seasonal features are going to discuss safety regulations with COVID, like this article does to the right. They tend to be entertaining, but they can also be informative, like what you need to do during the holidays to take care of yourself health wise or something like that. You need to find the unusual aspect because the thing about holidays is they tend to come every year. So you need to find what is unique and different about the holiday this year as opposed to in previous years. Explanatory features are those that present a local situation or they tend to interpret what's going on as well. And sometimes you will hear explanatory features referred to as local situation stories or interpretive stories. And that's because they're based off of hard news. These tend to be the more serious type of features that go into a little bit more detail. They have more analysis to discuss some specific topic related to the hard news story that you're writing. So, for instance, this story is a feature that was done, I believe it was Washington Post. That spun off a discussion about certain school systems were remaining remote due to COVID-19. And so this is a feature about how the achievement gap will widen because of remote learning, where poorer school districts are going to continue to not do well academically because of a lack of resources, while those school districts that are a little more affluent and can give their students remote learning resources a little bit better are going to achieve more. And so, therefore, it widens the academic gap. So, you can see this is a very long story, it's very in depth. And so, we see a lot of analysis here. A how to do it feature is a story that kind of walks your audience through how to deal with a particular situation. Here on the right, we have one from the Alabamian on a beginner's guide to wearing a mask, and it talks about why we should wear masks, what's the proper way to wear it, and things like that. So, a how to do it feature, it's important for you guys to remember that you have to rely on experts and research. You're not writing from your own advice. This is not an advice column. It's really based on expertise of others. And you need to pull information from a lot of different sources. One of the key aspects of how to do it features is that you need to provide easy to follow steps so that anyone reading the story knows how to do whatever it is the topic is after you finish writing it. I would suggest that you avoid this type of story for this class in particular, only because it can be very difficult to get the number of experts and sources that you need to make this a true feature story. Occupation or hobby features tend to provide this backstage pass to a particular profession or hobby. It gives people a glimpse behind the everyday life of someone in a particular profession. So I know for some of you, you did your print stories based on what the COVID experience has been like for faculty members. That is, in a sense, an occupation feature because you're talking about how the industry of academia is dealing with COVID-19. This story that is presented on the right actually looks at recovery specialists and how they got involved in addiction recovery. And it's actually a really interesting piece, but it was spun off of September being National Recovery Awareness Month, which would be a holiday feature. So you can see sometimes there's overlap between these genres, but this can be a very interesting way to tell about a particular profession or an interesting hobby that someone may have. Participation features are also inside looks at different things that are going on, but this type of feature is unique because it's told from the perspective of a journalist who is experiencing it. It's written in first person and it's not objective. So, this is not our traditional journalism format. They often involve long immersion processes, which means that you're going into a situation for a period of months, maybe even years, to write up this story. And they are very rare, primarily because they involve having to deal with a lot of resources, and also because there is some ethical consideration about whether a first person, non objective story should truly be considered journalism or whether it falls outside the bounds. Um, this type of feature story actually became popularized very early on in American history. This is Nellie Bly, who was an American journalist, and she went into mental asylums as a participant to experience what someone being checked into a mental facility would experience. And she exposed a lot of the wrongs that were going on. We've also seen people do this with prisons and biking gangs and things like that. Um, Again, there are a lot of ethical considerations for the safety of the journalist, for the participation of those involved, especially if the journalist is not disclosing that they are a journalist in that moment. So, obviously, this is a rare type of feature and not something that I want you to attempt for this class. So, speaking of your online feature assignment, you're going to be writing a digital feature story that could be placed on an online news website. You're going to focus on a person or organization, but it must be newsworthy. I also want us to step away for a moment from COVID specific coverage. So don't just talk to a student about what their experience has been like during COVID because you did that for your peer interview story. Those were certainly feature stories because they were featuring the student perspective of what it's like to deal with COVID. Instead, the only reason that I would allow a COVID based story is if that person has a unique or extraordinary circumstance. Maybe they're, starting a drive at for sharing masks or distributing masks out to college students, something like that. But they have to have a newsworthy, extraordinary circumstance for you to pitch me something COVID related. You must include a minimum of 2 interviews for this, and I still want your story to be objective, factual, person, and neutral. You need to attribute all emotion and opinions back to sources. I also want you to include a photo because all of online journalism really relies on the visual aspects of features, and features in particular rely so heavily on images. So make sure that you either take the photo with permission or you get a photo from your interview subject that they allow you to use. Please note that the online feature stories tend to be longer. So shoot for around 2,000 words. I'm not going to count your word count, but just make sure you have enough space to really tell a full story from beginning to climax to resolution. In order to do this assignment, I'm going to ask that you give me 3 feature pitches that will be due Friday, October 23rd. If you want approval prior to that Monday, which is when I will grade all of them. But if you want to start working on your feature prior to the 26th, just email me and I'll review your pitches in advance. If you want to just wait until the 26th for approval, that's fine too. Your final story will be due on Friday, October 30th. As a reminder, you will have the deadline built into your rubric. So while you can still turn in something late, you will take a point deduction starting now for late work. I will be going over in Wednesday's module what it looks like to write for an online piece specifically, but begin thinking about what features you want to do now. So, what's next? You will do your discussion post on feature stories, then pitch an online feature by Friday. You'll need to include 3. And then read the writing for digital article that I placed in Canvas. It's from Pointer and it provides some basic guidance on how to write for online news.